Call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone for the past hour, trying to decide whether to order dinner or just go to sleep hungry again. I didn't order dinner. I passed out instead. Not in my apartment, though. I was still at my desk at the hospital. Not as a patient, not yet, but as a billing coordinator on the third floor of St. Augustine Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I'd been there since 7 that morning. I hadn't eaten since the granola bar I found in my bag at noon. My head hit the keyboard, and the next thing I knew, two of my coworkers were kneeling beside me on the floor, and someone was calling my name like it was a question. Vanessa? Vanessa, can you hear me? I could hear them. I just couldn't answer right away. They called 911. They also called my emergency contact, my mom, because that's what the form in my HR file said to do. I'd filled that form out 3 years ago when I first started, when I still believed that my mom was the person who would drop everything and come if something was wrong. She didn't come. Let me back up because the collapse is not where this story starts. It starts the way most of my stories start, with money. I'm 29. I've been working since I was 16, first at a grocery store, then waitressing through college, then landing my first real job at 23 with benefits and a 401k and the kind of steady paycheck that made me feel like I'd finally figured something out. I was the first person in my immediate family to graduate college. I was also, it turned out, the first person in my immediate family to become what I can only describe now as a funding source. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It never does. It starts with one favor that makes complete sense. My dad's truck needed a repair. It was either fix the truck or he loses the job he needs to get to. Obviously, I helped. Of course I did. That's what you do. Then my brother needed first and last month's rent because his landlord gave him 2 weeks' notice and he had nowhere to go. Then my mom's credit card was about to go to collections and it was going to ruin her credit score and she was crying on the phone and I put it on my card and told myself I'd pay it off over the next few months. I did pay it off. It took 8 months. By the time I was 27, I was sending home roughly $1,200 a month, sometimes more. I had a spreadsheet, which is a deeply sad thing to admit, a spreadsheet where I tracked exactly who got what, because I'd made the mistake once of paying the same bill twice when my mom asked and my dad asked separately, and the second time I brought it up. My mom told me I was being dramatic and that family didn't keep score. I kept score, quietly, in a Google Sheet, with color coding. My rent in Columbus was $900. My student loan payment was $240. After utilities, groceries, car insurance, gas, and the $1,200 I sent home, I had maybe $150 left over in a good month. I hadn't been to a doctor for a checkup in 2 years. I bought the store brand version of everything. I had one streaming subscription that I shared with a friend, and even that I sometimes felt guilty about. I was not living, I was surviving and then handing the rest over. The thing about this arrangement was that nobody in my family talked about it directly. There was no conversation where someone said, "Hey, we need you to contribute this much." It just became expected. When I sent money, no one said thank you. When I was a week late because my own account was low, my mom would call and she'd sound tired and put upon, like I was the one making her life difficult. My brother was told me a happy Isaiah of the Ari. He once told me that I was lucky to have a good job, like that was a thing that happened to me, instead of something I worked for, while he was still hitting snooze. My dad was quieter about it. He didn't ask as much, but he also never told anyone else to back off. He never said, "Leave your sister alone, she's got her own bills." He just watched it happen, and I think part of me kept waiting for him to say something, and part of me already knew he wouldn't. My aunt, my mom's older sister, was the only one who ever pulled me aside and said something that stuck. It was at Christmas 2 years ago. She found me in the kitchen while everyone else was watching football, and she looked at me and said, "How are you actually doing?" And something about the way she said, "actually," just broke me open. I started crying into a dish towel for about 4 minutes, which is embarrassing, and she just stood there with her hand on my back. When I pulled myself together, she said, "You know this isn't your responsibility, right? The whole thing. None of it is your responsibility." I told her I knew that. I didn't act like I knew that. The year before I collapsed, things got worse. My dad lost his job. Company downsizing, which was real and not his fault. And suddenly the $1,200 a month became $1,500, then $17. My mom picked up some hours at a salon where she'd worked part-time before, but most of that, she said, went to groceries and gas. My brother was between jobs, which is where he'd been, on and off for about 2 years. I started skipping meals, not intentionally, not like a plan. I just kept pushing lunch later and later until it became dinner, and then I'd realize at 9 at night that I hadn't eaten since the coffee and half a yogurt I'd had at 7 in the morning. I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. I started getting headaches that came on in the afternoon and stayed until I went to bed. I told myself it was stress. I told myself everyone was stressed. I did not go to the doctor. I didn't want to see the bill. The Tuesday it happened, I'd been at work since before 7. We were behind on a processing backlog, and my supervisor had asked if anyone could come in early, and I'd said yes because I was good at saying yes. I drank 2 cups of coffee and skipped breakfast because I'd run out of things to bring and hadn't had time to go to the store. By 3 in the afternoon, I was dizzy enough that I noticed it. By 6, when I should have left, I was still at my desk trying to finish one more thing. By 8, there were only a handful of people left on the floor. At some point after that, I was on the floor in a different sense. I came to in a hospital bed, which is a deeply strange experience when you work in a hospital and know exactly what the ceiling tiles on the 3rd floor look like. I was on the 4th floor. I had an IV in my arm. A nurse was checking my vitals, and she smiled when she saw my eyes open. A real smile, the kind that said she was actually glad I was okay. "There she is," she said. "How are you feeling?" Like I'd been turned off and back on, I thought. I said, "Okay, what happened?" "Your blood pressure dropped pretty significantly. You fainted. Do you remember eating today?" I thought about it. "Coffee," I said, "and half a yogurt around 7. She wrote something down without commenting, but her expression said enough. They ran blood work. The results weren't catastrophic, but they weren't good. I was anemic. My blood sugar had dropped, I was dehydrated, and my blood pressure had been low enough to be concerning. The attending physician, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, sat on the edge of the bed and talked to me like a person, which I appreciated. He said I needed to eat regularly, reduce stress, follow up with a primary care doctor. He said it gently, but also like he was saying it for the 2nd or 3rd time and wanted it to land. "Do you have a support system?" he asked. "Someone at home?" "My family," I said, because that's what I believed then. He nodded and told me they'd notified my emergency contact. He said someone would be coming. No one came. I found out later, much later, from my coworker Trish, who'd been there when they made the call, that my mom had picked up the phone and said she'd be there as soon as she could. As soon as she could turned out to be never. My brother, when I finally reached him the next day, said he hadn't heard anything about it. My dad said he'd been at a friend's place and his phone had been on silent. What I did find, when I finally got my phone back around midnight, was a notification. My brother had posted something on Facebook, a photo. It was a picture of him and my mom and my dad laughing at what looked like a backyard cookout at my cousin's place. My dad had a burger in his hand. My mom was mid-laugh, her head thrown back. My brother was giving a thumbs up. He'd captioned it, "Finally, a stress-free family night. No drama, just good food and good people." I stared at that photo for a long time. I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, and my family was at a cookout 40 minutes away. And my brother had posted it at 9:47 p.m., which was roughly an hour after I'd been found unconscious on the floor. I didn't comment. I didn't text anyone. I just put the phone face down on the bed and looked at the ceiling. The next morning was when the calls started. Not right away. Not a frantic, "Oh my God, are you okay" kind of morning. No. The first call came at 8:15, and it was my mom, and before she asked how I was feeling, she asked if I'd seen the email from the power company, because they were threatening to shut off service and she'd already called twice and they needed $800 by Friday, or she didn't know what was going to happen. I said, "Mom, I was in the hospital last night." She said, "I know, your dad told me, are you okay?" There was a pause after that, but not because she was waiting for my answer. It was the kind of pause that people use to let the first topic settle so they can get back to the second one. The 800, she said. Can you do it? I said I'd think about it, and I ended the call. Over the next 4 days, while I was home recovering, the doctor had told me to take the rest of the week off. I received 11 phone calls from my family. Not one of them was a visit. My dad called twice. Both times he mentioned, somewhere in the middle of the conversation, that he was still looking for work and things were tight. My brother called once and talked for 22 minutes about a business idea he had that just needed a little startup money to get off the ground. My mom called 8 times. 3 of those times were about the power bill. 2 were about a credit card that was close to the limit. 1 was to ask if I still had my grandmother's ring because apparently there was some disagreement about who it was supposed to go to, and she wanted to make sure I hadn't misplaced it. Not one of those 11 calls included the words, "I'm coming over." Not one of them included, "Can I bring you anything?" Not one of them included a full, complete, unhurried, "How are you?" that was actually waiting for an answer. I ate cereal out of the box because I hadn't been to the grocery store before I got sick, and I was too tired and too sad to go now. I watched television. I don't remember. I slept 12 hours a night and still felt like I was underwater. On Thursday, my aunt called. She was my mom's sister, but sometimes it felt like they'd been raised by entirely different people. She lived about an hour away in Dayton, and she worked as an office manager at a dental practice, and she was the kind of person who showed up with soup when you were sick, not because she'd seen it on a list of things to do, but because that was just who she was. She didn't call to ask for anything. She called to say she was coming over on Saturday and asked what kind of soup I liked. I said tomato, and she said she'd make it from scratch, and I cried a little and tried to hide it, and she pretended not to notice. Saturday, she arrived with soup and bread and a small potted succulent that she said was for the windowsill because plants help. She also arrived with questions, and they were the kind that required actual answers. We sat at my kitchen table, and she really asked me, what things look like financially. I hadn't told anyone the full picture before. I'd been vague with friends, deflecting when they asked why I couldn't come to things or why I always ordered water at restaurants. With my aunt, I pulled up the spreadsheet. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Vanessa, this has to stop." I told her I knew. She said, "Not eventually. Now, this is why you ended up on that floor." I knew that too. I'd known it for at least a year, in the way you know something in your chest before your brain catches up. She asked if I had a will. I didn't. She asked if my family had access to any of my accounts. My mom had my routing number because I'd set up a recurring transfer 2 years ago. My dad knew my bank because I'd paid a bill online from his house once. My aunt's expression, when she heard this, was careful and deliberate. The way someone looks when they're trying not to alarm you, but also need you to take something seriously. "I want you to talk to someone," she said, "not me. A real financial advisor, or at minimum your bank. You need to understand what protections you have." I asked her if she thought there was something to worry about beyond the normal stuff. She was quiet for a moment. "I love my sister," she said, "but I've watched this for a long time, and I think there are people in your family who have become very comfortable with a situation that is not sustainable for you. And comfortable people don't let go easily." She was more right than I knew. About 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I made an appointment with a financial advisor through my employee benefits program. It was one of those things I'd always had access to and never used. The woman I met with was around 50, no nonsense, and she asked me to walk her through my monthly expenses and income. When I did, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You're aware that you're operating at a loss most months, right?" I was aware. She walked me through my options, setting up a separate account, revoking the automatic transfer, protecting my 401k. She explained that no one could touch my 401k without my consent, and that I should make sure I was the sole beneficiary on everything. She also, gently, mentioned that if there was anyone who might try to pursue legal guardianship or financial conservatorship over me, a real thing, she said, more common than people thought in situations involving financial dependency, I had rights, and I should know them. I don't think my family was planning anything that organized. But the fact that it was even a category of thing that existed, that there were people in the world who turned family members into legal cash machines, it settled something in me. I went home and canceled the automatic transfer. Then I sat on my couch for a long time. My mom called that evening and I didn't answer. She called again, and by the third time I picked up and said, "I need a few weeks to focus on my health. I can't send money right now." She was silent. Then she said, "So you're saying we don't matter?" I said, "I'm saying I almost didn't wake up off that floor and nobody came." Another silence. Then, "You know how hard things are for us right now." "I know," I said. "I also know that you were at a cookout." She started to say something about how she hadn't known how serious it was. And I said, "Mom, the hospital called you. You said you'd come. And then you didn't." She cried. And here's the thing about my mom's crying, I used to fix it immediately. The second I heard that sound, something in me would panic and scramble to make it stop, to apologize, to offer something. I'd been doing it since I was old enough to have something to offer. This time I just waited. When she finished, she said, "What does that mean for us?" "It means I need time," I said. "And I need you to start figuring out other options because I can't be the only plan." I got off the phone and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not yet, but something underneath it, like ground. My brother texted me 2 days later and said that I was acting really selfish, and that family was supposed to support each other, and he didn't understand what had changed. I wrote back and said, "I've been supporting this family for 6 years. I'm going to support myself for a while." He left me on read. My dad called, and his call was different from the others. He didn't ask for money. He asked how I was doing, actually how I was doing, and he was quiet and a little awkward about it, but it was real. I told him I was still tired. I told him I was still tired. I told him I was trying to figure some things out. He said he understood, and then he said something that surprised me. "I should have stepped in a long time ago. I didn't. I'm sorry." It wasn't everything. It wasn't a fix. But it was the first time anyone in that family had said the words, "I'm sorry" to me, in a context that didn't also include, "but." I started going to therapy. I found someone through my insurance who specialized in family systems in adult children of enmeshed families, which is a phrase I'd never heard before and which immediately explained about 15 years of my life. She had a way of asking questions that made me think I'd arrived at answers myself, which I later realized was the whole point. I started eating 3 meals a day. I know that sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. I started walking in the evenings just around the neighborhood, just to have somewhere to be that wasn't my apartment and wasn't my desk. One evening in October, the light was doing that thing it does in fall, going gold and sideways through the trees, and I realized I felt something close to okay, not repaired, not finished, not like everything was resolved, because it wasn't. My family was still struggling, and I still fielded occasional texts, and I still felt guilty sometimes, in a way that my therapist and I were working on. But, okay, present. Like I was inhabiting my life instead of funding someone else's. My aunt and I talked every week now. She'd become the clearest mirror I had, someone who knew the whole story and still managed to see me as a separate person from it. She'd also, quietly, had some hard conversations with my mom that I only heard about secondhand. I didn't ask for details. I just knew that my mom had started, for the first time, looking into programs for utilities assistance and food support, things that existed, things she could have found years ago, things she hadn't looked for because I was easier. A few months after the hospital, I found a slightly larger apartment. Still in Columbus, same neighborhood, but with a second bedroom. I was turning into an actual office. Not a dining table with a laptop, but a real desk and a real chair and a lamp I'd chosen because I liked it, not because it was on sale. I bought a real coffee maker instead of the $14 one I'd been using for 4 years. I went to the dentist for the first time in 3 years, and the hygienist said my teeth were actually fine, just some buildup, and I nearly laughed out loud because I'd been afraid to find out for so long. I still struggled with guilt. I'm not going to pretend that cutting back on supporting my family felt uncomplicated because it didn't. There were nights when I thought about the power bill or my dad's truck and felt like I'd done something wrong. My therapist had a word for this. She called it a trained response, the way a person can be conditioned over years to feel responsible for things that aren't theirs to carry. She said guilt and responsibility aren't theirs to carry. She said guilt and responsibility aren't the same thing, and that I'd been confusing them for a long time. I was still working on that. What I wasn't confused about anymore was this. The night I was on that floor, I had been disappearing, not dramatically, not all at once. Just slowly, meal by meal and dollar by dollar, and quiet morning by quiet morning, getting smaller to make room for everyone else's needs. And the people I'd been making room for had gone to a cookout. That's not a metaphor, that happened. And what happened after? The soup, the spreadsheet, the canceled transfer, the new apartment, the lamp I picked because I liked it. That was also real. That was me finding out what it felt like to take up the space I'd been shrinking out of for 6 years. My name is Vanessa. I'm 29 years old. I work in Columbus, Ohio, and I eat breakfast every morning now, and I answer the phone when I want to. And last month, for the first time since I started working, I had enough left over at the end of the month to put something into savings. I opened the account and typed in the first deposit, and I sat there looking at the number. It wasn't large. It will never be on a list of impressive numbers. And I thought about all the months I'd spent watching money leave before I could blink. All the times I'd done math in a parking lot trying to figure out if I could cover both my electric bill and someone else's crisis. All the spreadsheet rows in green and red in the granola bar I'd eaten standing up because I hadn't had time to sit down. And then I closed the laptop and I went and made dinner, and I ate it at my actual table, and it was enough. I keep thinking about that spreadsheet. All those rows. Green for sent, red for overdue, color-coded like I was managing a small business instead of trying to hold a family together with my own paycheck and my own skipped lunches. I built that spreadsheet because I needed proof, not for anyone else, just for myself, that I was doing enough. I think on some level, I already knew it would never be enough. That's the thing about trying to fill a hole that other people keep digging. What happened to me on that floor wasn't random. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. I didn't just happen to collapse. I had been collapsing slowly for years, and nobody noticed because I kept showing up. I kept covering the bills. I kept answering the phone. When you make yourself that reliable, people stop checking on you. They just expect the transfer to go through. I don't say that to be bitter. I say it because I think it's true, and because I spent a long time calling it love, when it was actually a pattern I had participated in, a pattern I had made easy. That's the part that took the longest to understand. Not that my family was taking advantage of me, but that I had believed somewhere deep down that being needed was the same thing as being valued. It isn't, and I had to lose myself pretty thoroughly before I could see the difference. My Aunt Lynn was the one who asked me the question that changed things. Not a dramatic question. Just, how are you actually doing? 5 words. But she meant them, and she waited for the answer, and that waiting did something to me that I didn't expect. It reminded me that I was a person with an interior life, not just a function. That sounds obvious. It was not obvious to me at the time. There's something I've come to believe about the way hard things work. The consequences usually match the choices, even when they're delayed. My family made a choice, over and over, to treat my stability as a resource instead of a relationship. I made a choice, over and over, to let them. The collapse was the consequence of both. And the recovery, the canceled transfer, the financial advisor, the therapy, the breakfast I eat every morning now, that's also a consequence of finally choosing differently. I'm not a more virtuous person for having gone through this. I'm just a clearer one. I understand now that real integrity isn't just about how you treat other people. It's about whether you're honest with yourself about what's happening to you. I was dishonest with myself for years. I called it loyalty. My therapist called it a trained response. We were both right. The strength it took to cancel that transfer, it wasn't dramatic. I didn't feel powerful. I felt sick to my stomach, and then I did it anyway. That's what I've learned about the kind of courage that actually matters in everyday life. It doesn't feel like strength when you're doing it. It feels like grief. You're letting go of a version of yourself that people depended on, and even if that version was hurting you, she was also familiar. Losing her feels like loss. even when it's necessary. I'm still figuring out who I am without the spreadsheet. But I ate breakfast this morning and I have money in savings. And when my phone rang last Tuesday, I looked at the screen first before I answered. That's enough for now.